Citizens in many contemporary states, whether or not they are primary citizens of those states, do seem to be able to reimagine nationhood in ways that take account of difference. They talk about multiculturalism, rainbow nations and the like, and this is a kind of language that tries to create accommodation amidst conflict. But when it comes to the limits of that difference, autochthony or birth constitutes an ultimate line, a kind of fons et origo of patriotism, affect, attachment. Whatever other identities the citizen subject may bear, he or she is unequivocally either an autochthon or an alien. Not only he or she, it too, non-humans may also be autochthons or aliens, as we'll see in a moment. The second transformation of the modernist polity concerns the regulation of borders and hence the limits of sovereignty. Much of the debate about sovereignty of the nation-state hinges on the contention that governments can no longer control the mobility of currencies and commercial instruments, of labor and goods, of flora and fauna, of information and illegal substances, of unwarranted aliens. Nor can they always control enclave zones, the frontiers within their realms, those under the sway of organized crime, NGOs, corporations, and the like, all of which has led many contemporary nation-states to resemble patchworks of sovereignty, arranged in space, with tenuous corridors between them, corridors between sites of order surrounded by terrains of ungovernability. National frontiers have always been more or less porous, of course, but technologies of space-time compression do appear to have effected a change in the patterns of global flows, of the concrete and the virtue of humans' object, science, currencies, communication. Which is why so many states, most maybe, act as if they were constantly subject both to invasion from outside and to the sweeping away of what should rightly belong within. South Africa, for instance, laments the pull overseas of its resources, while anguishing xenophobically about the inflow of migrants. And Western Europe, despite its declining population, agonizes over the spectre of being a future kind of Muslim Europe. Our object, though, is not just to remark the heightened concern with borders and their transgression. It's to observe that this concern is the product of a paradox. Under current global conditions, given the logic of significantly liberalized economies, states find themselves in a double bind. In order to maximize the value that's spun off by these economies, they require at once to open up their frontiers and to close them. On the one hand, to deregulate the movement of currencies, goods, people, and services, thus to facilitate the inflow of wealth, and on the other, to establish enclave zones of competitive advantage so as to attract transnational manufacture and media, investments, information technology, and the right kinds of migrants, tourists, corporate personnel, and specific sorts of laborers who will work cheaply without the entitlements of citizenship. In this way, the nation-state is made, at least as an aspiration, into a kind of meta-management enterprise, a business both in itself and in the business of attracting business, part franchise, part licensing authority. This in the interest of stakeholders who desire both to be global citizens and corporate subjects at the same time. The implication is plain. The border is a double bind because the common weal appears to demand both openness and closure. No wonder the avid public debate in so many places about who or who should not be allowed entry, who and who is not in the collective interest, who should be able to share the wealth of the nation. Hence the arguments also between those who would like to globalize capital by erasing all barriers and patriots that want to protect the national interest. And anybody here who remembers the debate about the Dubai ports deal here in the US a couple of years ago, where there was an argument at the one level about selling things like national ports to buyers, and then a strong reaction by saying, but in fact Dubai is ostensibly, in some ways, an enemy state, and how can we have them owning something like a port of entry into the country? And you saw there the kind of contradictions that I'm talking about here, the openness and closure of borders. The third salient feature of the predicament of the nation-state is the deflection of politics into other domains, into the law, into technology, into ritual, into the media, and above all, into the market. The conventional argument goes like this. neoliberal market forces, in their triumphal global phase, appear to offer no alternative but laissez-faire. No other political system is plausible. Even outposts of socialism like China or Cuba are actually seen to be kind of living in sin with the market and so on. The primary question left to public policy then is purely technical. How do we succeed in this new world order? Or at least that was the argument until the recent global financial crisis began to make itself felt. In its wake, amid frantic government interventions and the rash of gargantuan bailouts, there have been mounting calls everywhere for tighter oversight of finance markets and corporate practice. The radical rise of joblessness and homelessness across the world has offered evidence of the fragility of wealth generated by what people like Joseph Stiglitz have called ever more complex financial products that nobody fully understands. Will this foster an awareness that individual self-interest is not the same as the interest of society as a whole, as he suggests? Or a realization that the late modern world is not a limitless frontier for new kinds of business? Maybe, even contra the statements of people like Margaret Thatcher, there is such a thing as society. To be sure, the tone of public rhetoric, at least in Euro-America, as evidence that there is a significant rethinking here. Maybe not a return to a managed economy, but at least a sense that we have to think again about the degree to which the market brings value to all without any kinds of constraints and regulation. And the jury is out as to what the consequences will be. But prior to this moment of meltdown, it had been common in many places to talk about the end of politics, the retreat of the social, in a world in which interpersonal relations have resolved into the natural, the biological, the contractual, a world in which public life had been reduced to struggles, often fought by means of the law, over special interests and issues like the environment, abortion, healthcare, child welfare, domestic abuse, human rights, crime, capital punishment. Under these conditions, urgent questions of the moment cut across older lines of ideological and social commitment. Each takes the limelight and flares up into public awareness and then burns down again, its embers consigned to the recesses of collective consciousness, only to flame up and be kindled again if conditions are correct. The image of fire returns us to South Africa, and to the case I was talking about at the beginning, but now to a South Africa situated, if briefly, in a history of the present that involves altered forms of citizenship, an obsession with borders, aliens and autochthony, and various displacements of modernist politics into other kinds of domains.